We're going to go ahead and get started at 7 o'clock. See a number of you have dialed in already. Thanks for joining us this evening. Welcome. We're here to talk about the Macomb Township Master Plan. And tonight's topic is demographics and land use. So first, we're going to go over a little bit of the background of what the master plan process is. Next, we're going to have some panelists give presentations. That will be followed by some questions that we have prepared and received internally. And then lastly, we're going to open it up to some question and answer for those of you who have dialed in. Skip the slide there, but anyways, so what is a master plan? It's really a lot of things. A master plan is kind of a dynamic long-term planning document that really provides conceptual layout to guide the future growth and development of the township. Master planning is really about making that connection between the buildings and the social settings and their surrounding environments. A master plan includes analysis, recommendations, and suggestions for things like the township's population, economy, housing, the roadway network, community facilities, and land use. It's based largely on public input, which is why we're here this evening. It's also based on surveys, existing developments and development patterns, physical characteristics, social and economic conditions. The resulting master plan document provides us, ways and means for the township to become what it is desired to be in the future, so that we can progress to what the residents of the township really want it to look like. As I mentioned, it's kind of a guiding document that can be used to help us with ordinances as well. And we have a number of items that we've been doing here with the master plan. We had a couple meetings 2 weeks ago. We met about roads and utilities. We met about recreation, trails, and mobility. And we are meeting tonight about land use and demographics. Please visit our website, cultivatemacomb.com. I'm assuming if you got here to dial in, you've already visited. But please take the survey if you have not yet. We did check this morning. We're at 146 surveys. So please continue to share with friends so we can get more surveys included. We also have a number of other upcoming meetings that are a little bit more focused. We're going to be meeting with some of the residents and landowners in both the Macomb Town Center and the northeast area of the township. We've sent out some mailers to those folks to participate. Business success, we're going to talk with the Chamber of Commerce as well as a number of local developers that have done work in the township and in the area. And then lastly, resident vision, we're going to talk with some of the homeowners associations to really get their input more specifically on some of the residential neighborhoods and what they would like to see there. A timeline was asked for last time we met, so here's a little bit of a timeline. This is kind of an ever-evolving timeline, but we're going to finish the virtual engagement at the end of November, about a month from now, and then really through the winter months, we're going to be developing the draft of the master plan. That's really the bulk, kind of the meat and potatoes of the process, where we're going to work with the steering committee and really look at what exists out there and what we want the township to look like based on our feedback from the surveys and from this process. Then in the early part of the spring, we'll take our draft document, get board authorization to distribute it, and that opens up a required public review period. Once that review period is over, we'll take all of those comments that we heard and develop a final report. We will host a final public hearing where we can display the results of that process and what the final document looks like, take in any last minute comments, and then take it to the board sometime early to midsummer for formal adoption. So that gets us to what we're here to talk about today. Again, we're here to talk about demographics and land use. Our two panelists up first will be Dave Scurto, who is the Township's planning consultant, who works for Carlisle, Wortman Associates. And then he will be followed by SaintAmour from Cobalt Community Research. We've taken a pretty deep dive into the demographics within the township, and he's going to talk a little bit about that. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Scurto.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you for everyone for listening in. My name is David Scurto. I am a principal with Carlisle Wortman Associates, primary contact for Macomb Township, and I'm working with Josh to lead this master plan process. Right now, in the stage of the process we're in is where we've collected a number, quite a large amount of data, land use as well as demographics. We'll get into some trends about housing and people after me. Right now, I got a team out there with field verifying some of the land use data we've collected from the county. And we are in the process right now of asking each other, asking the community questions on where they want to go, and we're wide open to considering all the options out there as we get ready to start drafting the program. What I will do tonight is I'll give you an overall description of the existing land use, and then I will break that down into housing and parks, commercial and office areas, industry, agriculture. And with that, I'm going to pose a number of questions that we are asking ourselves. We hope to receive input from the community on. Then we'll finish up with some more focused topics such as agricultural zone property and the Macomb Town Center before Will steps in. Right, we're in front of you right now. You can see this is the existing land use map for the township. As you can see, the largest colors up there, single family housing is in yellow. Multiple families a little darker, kind of light brown. Greens will be your recreation, open space, agriculture, cemeteries, golf courses. Reds is your commercial and office and hospitality. Light blues are like medical facilities, and industry is in purple. The gray is a vacant, we consider a vacant property. As you can see, single family, which is the yellow color, is occupies nearly half of the land area, private land area in the township. It occupies 44%. Agriculture, recreation, open space, and vacant land, which are all the green colors, they occupy nearly a third of the land mass in the township at 32%. The streets and roads occupy 11% of the township, and the balance, which is 13%, is occupied by multiple family, commercial, office, medical, and industrial land uses. And you can see, as I say, all the percentages and acreages are calculated to the right. If we focus in, we always try to think in groupings of types of land uses and how they're used. We focus in on this slide here, on the map on the left, we're showing the neighborhoods and parks. Single family, again, is yellow, it's highlighted. Multiple family is the orangish color. Parks are the green, they do not include the golf courses. And in terms of these land uses, you can see where the grays are. Is what we noticed is most of the subdivisions, the typical subdivisions that are platted, are in the southern, central, and western parts of the township. Northeast area has a concentration of homes, but they are primarily on larger lots. Some of the questions we're asking ourselves right now is, should we continue with the same development patterns and types of housing? We fully expect the open residential and ag areas to start looking for more housing development, which would be sections 3, 2, 1, 11 and 12 are open, 13. And so we're asking ourselves, do we still want the same type of housing to be developed in these areas? Is there new housing types that would be acceptable? Is there mixed use? Is there a large lot of estate type homes that have a place? And are there enough opportunities so homeowners can age in place? And aging in place doesn't have to be in the same unit, but can they move to a smaller unit within the same area, so their medical doctors, come where they shop and other familiar daily tasks that they have they can still get to without much lifestyle disruption. We're also looking at proximity to parks. Where the parks are located, you have a very robust program with a good rec department. So this plan can accelerate and help them through a policy, figure out where the next park should be. Some of the items we're looking at, if you look at the northeast area, we have quite a few natural features in terms of creeks and rivers and such. Do we incorporate natural features and trails into the next generation of housing development? Do we put an overlay zoning district in place where they have to respect that and allow the trail system that the county's trying to do countywide to work their way through from north to south and connect up to the larger regional trail system? And finally, we have the existing neighborhoods in place. They will continue to age over the next 20 years. And we also are asking which ways should we look at to maintain existing neighborhoods? Is there code enforcement issues, road reconstruction and items like that? How do we make sure that the neighborhoods stay pristine and healthy? Thank you, Josh. You can keep releasing some photos. The next item is commercial and office. These commercial and office areas are smaller. They don't occupy quite a bit, don't occupy a lot of land mass. You can see it's about 2.5% of the land mass in the township. We found most of them are concentrated along Hall Road and at major intersections, and everybody listening understands that. We did see little to no commercial in the northeast. We are seeing some interest being shown along the major intersections, 25 Mile in Broughton, 24 Mile and north and such. The the township doesn't have any large shopping centers, and this may not be a bad thing at this point. In our experience and listening to a lot of seminars we go to, we're finding out that in the next 10 years, they're expecting 75% of all large shopping centers to be closed and vacated. So they are trending towards a whole different type of development. We're seeing retail shopping trends tending towards major big box stores, but most of them are developing smaller type stores now. And they prefer to be in walkable areas, mixed use areas, areas that people can come and spend time at. We are looking at, is there a township where there's a lack of commercial and office uses? We do run into a number of developers that want to change the zoning from a commercial to a residential use. And our question is that wise, or is that just a trend that we don't want to lose a commercial type space? What types of commercial uses are needed? Which types of commercial office uses may we have too much of? What are the post-COVID implications and trends? For example, our shopping centers seem to be changing face. Same with offices, dealing with people working from home and such. We're finding quite a few centers trying to connect more to the public walkways and trail systems. Can small custom artisan production be part of a commercial area? We're seeing more hybrid type commercial uses, such as someone doing custom craftsmanship, selling something up front, from making musical instruments to things like salsa or food products, but yet they need a small production area in the back of their business. Can that be an acceptable use? In terms of zoning right now, it's not, but can it be? And also, when site plans come in, should pedestrian access be a greater part of our site plan review process, connection to the trailways and landscaping and such? Thank you, Josh. Okay, industry. It's another item we're really looking at hard. We have concentrations of industry on 23 Mile west of Romeo Plank and in the 21 Mile and Gratiot areas. We're looking at, do we need additional acres of zone industrial property? We're seeing quite a bit of interest coming for industrial area. We're running into the lack of really large industrial sites. As part of our questions, we're asking, is there a available area outside the existing industrial zone property right now we should take a serious hard look at? And finally, in terms of online shopping, that's looking at distribution. Will that continue to accelerate, and what are the effects on traffic? We're seeing a lot of interest in distribution centers and things like that. This next slide is a picture highlighting agriculture and open space. You can see that quite a few of the areas up in the northeast section, golf courses are in green. We are seeing interest in redeveloping some of the golf courses. Some interest being expressed in starting to move up to section 3 in terms of development. And again, so a lot of these questions are reiterated from a previous slide, is how should these properties be developed when offered for sale? Should residential subdivisions, like much of the township, continue everywhere and continue? Should other types of housing be looked at, like estate homes, higher density, we call eco-friendly homes that incorporate trails and waterways and things that focus on a smaller set of buyers be allowed? And are there some really specific locations we should look at doing this? Finally, the piggyback on what Mr. Van Tiffelen presented a few weeks ago is what are the impacts of water and sewer on development types and patterns, especially in the northeast area. I want to bring this item up. This is agricultural zone property in the township. These are not, last slide was agricultural land use sites and recreation sites. These are the actual sites are zoned for agricultural use. These are primarily located in high traffic roads. The largest parcels are concentrated in the northeast. What you do see, if you look down in the southwest and the west part, you'll see many small parcels scattered throughout the township. These look to be a lot of remnant properties from previous farms where the original houses still stand. Our considerations we're looking at is, can other uses besides just plain on the smaller lots, can other uses besides detached single family happen on these parcels? We see a modest increase in residential density on these remnant parcels. And can you permit different types of home occupations that allow small scale custom or artisanal production, with safeguards to protect surrounding housing units that exist? One of another focus topic we're looking at is Macomb Town Center. This is in section 9, bounded by 25 mile in the north, 24 mile on the south, what would be Wortman Road on the west, and what would you say that is, Josh? It's kind of just east of Broughton Road.
It would basically be Broughton, future
in
Broughton or Hayden, right?
Yeah. Township Hall and the rec center, our new library located in this area. The intent of this zone is to create a walkable community of higher density housing with centrally located parks and a couple of commercial cores, and that's leading into a different housing type. We're looking at, will the projected post-COVID trend away from shopping centers actually benefit and accelerate development of the townships of the core commercial areas in here? Can office and commercial development outside on the periphery of the town center coexist? We're seeing some interest along 24 mile and 25 mile. Can that be accelerated above the central core being development? Can that coexist, or does it have to work in a reverse feeling? Broughton Road is a planned community-wide road servicing the town center, and should the extension of Broughton Road continue to be a priority in working with the county to get that paved from 25 mile, 24 mile and beyond. And then our final question is, if a commercial development or office development happens within section 9, will residents in other parts of the township utilize the cafes and the shopping that are allowed? I'm going to end my presentation here. This is more of the development plan that we're following from Macomb Town Center in more detail. You can see over on the right, the large gray road, the thick gray road is Broughton Road, 25 miles at the north, 24 miles at the south. It calls for a larger central community core of shopping and public buildings. The public buildings exist, so right in that general area, those are shown in the purple color. It shows commercial districts located throughout, 4 major commercial districts located throughout the area, section 9, and associated central parks, and with higher density housing surrounding them as a core, as a ring around the core. A lot of the other areas, the yellows and the oranges, are higher density, but they're still detached single family, but a higher density than currently developed outside this section. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Will and go through demographics.
Will, are you out there? Can you hear us? And let's hope we can hear you.
I am out here. Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And David, I think or Josh, I'll need to have you bounce along on the slides as I go through, if you don't mind.
Let me know when you're ready for the next slide and I will move it along.
I'm ready. Let's go ahead and dive in. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is where people are working and what that concentration looks like currently. You can see that the 3 major areas from the perspective of establishments, those are the blue lines, are services, retail, trade, and construction. And so when we look at those, the kinds of organizations that are within those, in services, we have mainly educational, health, engineering and research, and business services. Those are your key industries within that broader category. Under retail, you've got eating and drinking establishments, automotive, and food stores. Interestingly, manufacturing is a pretty significant entity. While there's not that many individual establishments, it does hire a significant portion of your population. And the kind of manufacturing that you have going on within the township currently is machinery, computer equipment, rubber and plastic, and transportation equipment. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at the population, one thing that immediately jumps out to me is that the population growth has been very strong and is projected to continue to be strong. You can see that the total population will be going up about 7%. You can see that over on the far right-hand side. Total number of households will be going up 8%. And when we look at the total available labor source, labor supply, it looks like in the next 5 years, that'll be going up about 9%. So one of the questions that you'll need to consider is where to have all of these folks live if you want to hold on to them and if you want to attract more folks. Next slide, please. So when we look at the age of these folks, it's interesting to see that there are 2 populations that are the largest spikes within the township. So you have the folks who are age 15 to about 34. So those are your Generation Z and the late millennials. And then you can see down at the bottom, we've got the 65 and over, who are mainly comprised of the aging boomers. Not a lot of the Generation X folks there in the middle. The median age along the very bottom row, you can see that that's been creeping up. So back in 2000, it was age 34, age 37 in 2010. Current estimate is 39. And the projection is for that to go up to age 40 in the next 5 years. So again, thinking about what are the needs of these 2 population segments, the younger cohort and this older cohort, what are their needs going to be from a housing perspective and also from a shopping, from a service standpoint, and so on. Next slide, please. Another important thing for you to take into consideration is the household income. So household income is continuing to rise in the township. When we look at the percentage of folks who have a household income of over $150,000, you can see that's jumping by about 24% in the next 5 years. When we look at both the average and the median household incomes, you can see that those are very strong. Current estimates are about $105,000 for the average and $93,000 for the median, and those will be going up 8 and 7% respectively. So there is a lot of wealth in the township, and that's going to be a factor as you think about what kind of things to do moving forward. Next slide, please. One of the things that we like to do is get a little bit more color on these different population groups. So we wanted to look at the market segments, the psychographics around each of the major groups within the township. And the largest segment is one called generational soup. And just to give you a sense of who these folks are, they're older couples, multiple breadwinners, so people that are often still working, college educated, Pretty laid back folks, and they enjoy cooking and reading, plays, antiquing, do-it-yourself kind of projects. There are some younger folks in this particular cohort that are very similar, but also have interest in bars and comedy clubs, concerts, yoga, fitness, those kind of things. This group is very tech savvy. They're value minded. So while they have plenty of wealth, they don't want to just throw it away. They want to make sure that those funds are focused and used in a way that they are getting value out of. And they're very family oriented. Next slide, please. Next group is a bit of a younger cohort. These are the fast track couples. Typically they're married and under age 35. They have some college education that's a bit more mixed. Some of them don't have as much education. Both partners are working. They have a fair amount of debt that they're working on paying off. A lot of enjoyment of athletic kinds of activities, very similar kinds of things as the group that we just looked at. They're also very tech savvy. They like a little bit more of the conspicuous consumption, so they tend to have nicer cars, a lot of SUVs. Their shopping is typically online instead of going to little shops and so on. And they have very busy lives. So they don't have a lot of time to volunteer. They do a lot of eating out. They are very interested in convenience and those kind of things. Next slide, please. The third largest group is called Kids in Cabernet. So these tend to be middle-aged folks, again, affluent, and they have children. They very well educated, and they're upwardly mobile. So they're typically mid-management kind of folks that are still on the rise. They have young children, and they tend to really focus their lifestyles around the kids. So they do a lot of shuttling kids all over the place. They are very active in school programs. They also enjoy a lot of the physical kind of things. They like to get out. They like to hike. They like to travel. They like concerts, restaurants, those kind of things. And there's a definite theme to these different groups that we're looking at within the township. They are early adopters for both general technology as far as gadgets and also for automotive technology, but they're also very pragmatic. So again, kind of like the last segment, they tend to be focused on value and making sure that they're getting things not because it's new and shiny, but because it makes their lives easier or enhances the quality of their lives. Again, they tend to be online shoppers. Oh, go back a little bit. Online shoppers, they tend to be green-minded, so they like to buy things that have a little less of an environmental footprint. They like to focus on whole food kind of things, but again, they don't have a lot of time, and they're willing to pay whatever is needed regarding health and healthcare. So those are things that continue to drive value for them. Next slide, please. This last one isn't the largest segment in the township, but it's the largest emerging segment. It's growing very rapidly. And these are your digital dependents. So these are the folks who are single and just starting to leave the nest. They've got their first real jobs. They're starting to get apartments and those kind of things. They tend to have a college education, modest incomes. They tend to move frequently. So if these are folks that you want to hold on to, you need to keep in mind that they're not necessarily tightly anchored into your community. And that's something that you'll want to really design for. They're digital natives, so from a tech standpoint, they're immediately into that. Again, the athletics, the bars, the movies, doing recreational kinds of things back when we could actually, gather in groups. They have those champagne tastes and beer budgets though, because they have those modest incomes. And so making sure, again, that these are things that have value for them, that's affordable and accessible. Their cars tend to be older, often compacts. Again, they're very online folks, and they tend to be a lot more progressive than some of the other generations that we looked at. So very globally conscious, certainly a little more left-leaning. Next slide. So as we think about that, we wanted to overlay that with the supply and demand. And this is looking at how much folks in the township are currently spending on different types of services. That is the second column that says demand. And how much are they spending inside the townships? How much are the various stores in the township capturing of that spend? So that would be the supply side, the sales side. So if we look at the very first row, jewelry, luggage, leather goods stores, the popular demand is about $13 million per year in the township. There's no one providing that service in the township. And so the gap is that whole $13 million. And that's why it has that leakage supply factor of 100. But glancing through this list, these are the top 10 based on the leakage supply. So how much of a desert is the township for these various areas? But if you're looking at business ideas, the broader report that the township has allows you to look at not just the supply factor, the leakage supply factor, but also the overall size of the market. So if we look at the jewelry, luggage, and leather goods stores, it's about $13 million, a huge gap. But if we look at something like grocery shopping, the gap is only about, the factor is only about 36, but it's such a huge amount that that particular gap is worth over $100 million. So these are things to think about when you're looking at trying to draw different businesses in. But when you're looking at this just from the perspective of a service desert kind of thing, this is showing you where those biggest gaps are. So we've got the jewelry, we've got books and periodicals, and looking at the demographic things we just went over, one of the types of stores that might be interesting is a used bookstore, or a combination new and used bookstore kind of thing. You can see the next one, used merchandise stores. There's a fair amount of spending that goes on for those, especially for those digital dependents and people with kids. So those are things that are opportunities to look at. Next slide, please. So thinking about the way that the population is evolving, looking at the psychographics from those different mosaic segments that we looked at, and looking at the leakage kind of things, there's a number of areas that kind of jumped out at us that are things that you should consider. First of all, you've got a very active set of folks. These are people that like hiking, they like athletic kind of activities. So continued investment in the parks, recreational programs, trails, and pet-friendly facilities are things that will provide a lot of value. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting about your particular population is that they spend way more on pets than a lot of communities do. So there's an index where 100 equals the annual, the average for the country. And for your particular population, it's well over 200, that particular factor. So pets are well loved and also spending on these kind of wellness types of activities. So businesses that are related to nature and hiking and all these kind of things, those are things that will also be well received. Services and stores built around health and wellness and also various healthcare providers are things that you'll want to consider as well, particularly as you think about the unique needs of the two main age cohorts that we talked about, the Generation Z and the boomers. So for folks who are in Generation Z, just starting out, but in the next 5 years, they'll start getting married and having kids and those kind of things. So things like pediatricians, minute clinics, psychiatric support, which is often an area that's very lacking in most communities. For some of the older folks in your community, things like physical therapy, nutrition, dermatology, audiology, those kinds of services that are often needed by the older population would provide a lot of value. Other things that you might want to think about are health-themed grocery stores. So it could be an actual health food store, but also stores that just tend to be a little bit more focused on natural foods, like a Fresh Thyme or a Trader Joe's. Something along those lines may be a nice fit for what you're doing, especially since when we look deeper in the data, we can see there's quite a bit of leakage in the grocery and food area that goes out of town. Next slide, please. Other considerations to think about. We saw clothing stores actually are a very large area of dollars going out of the township. And so that's something that you want to think about, especially as you're doing the different kind of little shops. The other motorized kinds of transportation, so dealers, people who sell RVs, ORVs, or that support travel kind of things, again, once we can travel again, that's an opportunity for your township. There's a lot of space for dining and drinking and continuing to build that out, especially things that might be a little bit more upscale and trendy. So breweries certainly are something that would be well received. Meaderies, so mead, so honey-based wines, that's something that's of growing interest. Distilleries are also something that's hot and growing. So some of those enterprises are things that you might want to consider. Independent bookstores, used bookstores, and then expanding more multifamily housing. So the younger cohorts, when you dive into the details on Generation Z, they often don't want to buy an expensive house. They don't want to be tied down. So they want something that's more valuable for their dollars. They want to make sure that they are flexible and that they're not going to get trapped. So they tend to value rentals or small houses that are in communities that have a lot of services um, and those kind of things. They also often don't have cars and aren't as interested in having cars as other generations have been. So access to Uber and Lyft tend to be pretty important to these groups as well. For the older cohorts, high-end senior living, that's going to be something that's more and more important, or potentially service providers that do property management for private individuals and not just necessarily multifamily. Another thing that you may want to consider from a zoning standpoint is allowing ancillary structures on residential properties, those mother-in-law spaces, whether it's something above the garage or an addition kind of thing, that does provide some additional space for those younger people who are just trying to get out and might not want to have a multifamily kind of experience, but might be interested in just having that space above someone's garage as a place to call home. Next slide. So those are the key high-level things from a demographic standpoint. Like I said, there's a lot more detail that's available for those of you who want to dive into it. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Since we got you on the line here, I guess we've got some questions that we've developed internally and received through the project website. So I'll start with the questions that I think are more directed at your expertise here. You mentioned some of the ages within the community, and Macomb Township, much of Michigan, is kind of trending older. What can the township do to attract and retain some of those younger families?
Yeah, some of those are things that I talked about just a minute ago. Certainly the trails are something that would provide value to really all of the residents. Trails have been very hot, but especially for younger folks that want to be more active, closer to nature, that is a huge selling point. Walkability and bikeability scores. If you go to, I think it's walkable.com, they do a scoring process for individual communities. And the score for the township is not very good. And that is very closely tied with how attractive it is to younger residents. Also, building out some of those kind of boutique shops and restaurants that are a little bit more experiential. So whether it's someone that's a butcher, a baker, cheesemakers, meaderies, all of those kind of things are things that would attract people to, first of all, visit the town. And then if the housing market is high value, but still feels safe and clean and has a lot of amenities, folks would start to settle down. And folks that are born in the township might be attracted to stay in the community.
Sure. Thanks. Another question, kind of looking at current trends and kind of that demonstrated need within the township. You pointed out some of the things like more senior housing and maybe some more apartment or condo type housing for those younger folks that are just getting into the housing market. Based on that information, I mean, should we only be focusing on those things? Should we focus largely on those or solely on those? As far as single family homes, I mean, how do you envision the future of that in this township?
Your population will be going up about 8%. And so you need to have a place to put those folks. So it depends on what you can get developed in the township to accommodate them. So it's likely going to be a mix of housing types. For the younger cohort, renting is much more accessible. There's a lower perceived risk because they can, at their lease end, they can move somewhere else if they wanted to move to Colorado or to North Carolina or somewhere else in Michigan. So a lot less risky than buying a house. But you have a lot of folks that have very nice homes in the township. They want to keep it. They will probably often want to stay in the house. And if there are services available in the township to help them maintain the property, then they would stay in the house longer and you'd be able to retain them longer. But building in an ancillary kind of structure or the ability to do ancillary structures when you do build single family homes, I think that's something that helps split the difference a little bit so that people do have the option of, if it's a younger person moving in at grandma and grandpa's big house just to kind of keep an eye on them and do the yard and those kind of things. Or it could be something that provides some additional revenue to help offset some of the property maintenance kind of things.
Great. Thank you for that. Dave, I got a couple questions that might be better geared for you as well. You talked a lot about development and what type of development and where, where that development should go. Are there any areas in the township that absolutely must be preserved as is, kind of not be developed?
In terms of residential.
Well, just in general.
In general, I believe that in general, right now, existing subdivisions, we should make efforts to preserve those. That's one housing type that we should look at preserving as is. The big decision will be, do we keep moving and do the same product, more of the same product or not? It's a big decision for the planning commission and the township board. The other areas to keep in mind is the commercial. We're seeing a trend, we're seeing interest in zoning some of the commercial areas to residential. And we're seeing that, boy, it just looks like in terms of the need, the supply versus demand, should have to retain that commercial. So I think we try to retain the commercial as much as possible. That helps in industries like the opposite effect. We're seeing how many manufacturing jobs are put out by industry. If you want to retain residents, we look at increasing the amount of industrial space.
And then I guess to follow up on that, to maybe capture both of, clearly there must be a need for single family or for residential. Yeah. That's why it keeps getting proposed in commercial zoned areas. But yeah, we don't want to lose the commercial zoned areas. Should we allow more of that mixed use residential development to have, say, commercial and retail on the main floor and, residential quarters above, which would likely then mean, a higher rise of a building.
I think it's a housing option. I think every community should look at housing options rather than put all their eggs in one basket. Because if your supply rises above demand in 5 years, 10 years, then you got a problem with property values dropping if there's too much supply. So I think we should always have options, but it's got to be strategic. We're going to do mixed use in an area like that. We ought to make sure there's enough, like they talk about trails and commercial, and there's things people that want to live in mixed use are going to stay away from having cars and have to travel everywhere. Do we look at a larger strategy of how we position?
Sure. And with that in mind, looking at kind of the downtown area or the town center, as we call it, to make that more successful, it would need to be dense, more dense than most of the developments within the township. Do you see that as a reality, or is that really, really far off into the future?
I don't know what the market is right now, but I think we hold on to the density if we're going to do it. If you're going to attract a retailer that's going to be kind of off really major roads like Hall Road, 23 mile, 26 mile, you're going to attract them. They're going to want enough residential density where people will walk down or drive a short distance to use their services. So I think it's important to retain that higher density in that downtown core area, Section 9 area.
Sure.
One thing I just wanted to throw in there from a demographic standpoint is the Generation Z folks and even the millennials, they tend to be a lot more entrepreneurial than other generations have been. Partly it's just they want the kind of the security of having multiple streams of income. But to come back to the idea of mixed use properties, having those rental spaces up above and then having a decent supply of commercial spaces on the lower level, that's something that may attract more entrepreneurship from those groups. If they can just take the stairs down and go to work, that's something that would definitely be attractive to them. As far as some of the kind of shops, I talked about that a little bit, but maker spaces and co-working spaces, as well as some of the artisan kind of things, those might be really cool activities to put in some of those mixed use buildings that have some of the younger tenants above the stores.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for that, Will. Dave, you also mentioned, you touched on this a little bit, the industrial zoning property. Yeah. We are seeing a lot of requests for site developments there. And as you said, there's very few very large scale pieces left that's zoned industrial. Do you think we need to take a look at the remaining property within the township and find more space for industrial properties? And if so, where would that be?
It deserves a close look to see where to go. I would start with looking at where the existing locations are. We can build off the existing locations. I know there's a couple large vacant parcels down by the 21-mile area between Fairchild and Gratiot. There's some parcels in there. We got the 23-mile corridor. As of right now, I don't know where else I would look. I would like to look at a larger strategy and see if there's any other areas in the township that pop up. I know some things you have to, look at closely when you look at industry is the sewer and the water issues. They use a tremendous amount of water. We have to make sure if we're gonna plan for industry in a certain area, there's enough water and also electricity. The power usage is huge for these. So we gotta make sure those infrastructure improvements are in place.
Right. Yeah, and I do know that a lot of times they also have businesses that depend heavily on transportation. So
Yes.
freeway access and large roadway access is very important for those businesses on a regular basis. Okay, that was all the questions we had internally. So I guess I want to open it up to those folks listening in. If you want to speak, raise your hand. I'm sure our IT folks can direct you on how to do that, but raise your hand, or you can leave some messages in the chat and I'll read those as well. But is there anybody who would like to speak?
If you'd like to go ahead and speak, there's a button for virtually raising your hand, or if you want, like you said, you can put a question in the chat. I noticed there are a couple of comments in there right now.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I got a question. Both panelists, Will and Dave. Do you have a bead on, do young couples with children, young children, are they looking for a larger house in a bigger yard or a bigger yard in a little bit smaller house? What are they actually, is there a need for the yards to be as big as they are, or they want the house bigger? What is the preference?
Will, you want to go first?
Sure. I don't have the data on that necessarily. I can tell you that from a generational standpoint, coming back to the emerging Generation Z folks, they tend to be interested in smaller houses, and they like to have kind of a little bit more of the back to nature kind of thing. So my gut tells me it's the smaller house and larger yard that would be more attractive to them because it's more efficient to maintain and heat and cool a smaller house as well.
Yeah, and I agree with Will. It's like they're trying to get, they travel a lot, or they have young kids, they're in travel sports, they're always on the go. And the less they have to maintain, probably better for them. Some of the other things you understand, the cost of housing, we saw that one slide that Will put up with affordability and two incomes needed to take care of a house. A smaller house is less costly to them as they try to pay off a mortgage.
Okay. Thank you. And I got one more quick question to the both of you. Homeschooling does seem to be gaining traction.
Yes.
And does that impact, where does that impact where we need to pay attention to, or do we even need to pay attention to it?
Part of me said, yeah, you should pay attention to it. I know we have one larger parcel in the township that a school district owns. And some of the school districts do own property. Are they going to need that property, or are they going to be selling that property? So we need to keep that on the radar at all points, at all times, because I don't know what the needs are of the school, because things are evolving real quickly now.
With the COVID,
Yes.
It's brought to light a lot of different habits of living.
Yes.
And that's why I often wonder now, where's that going to go?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I'll weigh in on that a little bit too, Charlie. I know, school districts can often play a role in where people choose to live. I think that as time goes on, that is going away, as I'm sure it's still a determining factor somewhat, but not as determining as it has been in the past. School of choice is becoming more prevalent, which allow folks to participate in schools that they don't live in the district for. And because of that, I think it's kind of making that definitive line of this is this school district and that is that school district kind of be a little blurred, and making it less important. Still important to some, but less important, I think.
To house buyers.
Yes.
One consideration that you'll want to bake into your plan is putting in conduit for high-speed internet and getting the internet out to those parts of the township that may not have broadband available. That is incredibly important, not only from an educational standpoint, but also from a business generation standpoint. It's really something that's becoming expected. Some people find the internet more important than having running water to their house.
Yeah.
Good point.
We do have some comments coming in the chat here. Mr. Lucido says, you know, the emerging segment was a perfect slide for my comment. I think the township needs high-end apartment buildings or live-work development to entice the younger generation that doesn't want to spend the $300,000 plus on a home. I would totally agree with that. And we need to find a way to keep the people that live here in the township to spend their money here too. Yeah, I think, you know, some of those food sales that Will mentioned, that's kind of that leakage. Though I've only been here with the township for 7 or 8 months now, I very, very commonly hear restaurants as being something that's lacking. Now, given the COVID pandemic situation, it might be difficult for someone to financially open a restaurant right now. But I definitely think as things start to rebound, that's an area that the township certainly is in desirement of, whether or not the developers and the folks who would be the ones opening that see it that way. But I certainly think the township, that's something that they really want, is that more opportunities for restaurants. Some of these services, another comment from Mr. Tuckfield, some of these services such as bookstores are a dangerous use to plan for, considering the proliferation of e-commerce. Yeah, a lot of bookstores, I mean, the chain bookstores have gone out of business completely, or really scaled down to, you know, only those regional stores. I don't know, Will, if you want to weigh in on that a little bit, on where you see the opportunities for things like used bookstores.
Sure. And the bookstores just really came from looking at a gap in the data. So currently residents are spending money on books. So that is something that there is demand that's going out of the township. I think it's really going to be market driven. So if there's enough demand and there's an entrepreneur out there that wants to do it, then that's, you know, the market will determine the success. Bookstores, though, have evolved and are continuing to evolve to something that's much broader than books. So they may have books, but they also have musical programs. They have various recreational events and meetings going on. They've got coffee. They've got all kinds of things that are available. So while there's books that people can flip through, you know, that's just part of building the charm and the ambiance of the place. They actually make their money in other areas.
Thanks, Will. We do have another comment here from Linda Clore. Can we get more green area in the southern areas of the township? Any picnic and nature retention would be great. I have some ideas about this, but that is something that is that something that the township sees as important? Is there space? And she also says, good point about the internet. Can the township help in providing this for the residents in general? Yeah, as we mentioned last week with the Parks and Rec discussion, and Linda, I think you were on that one as well. Definitely, it's been pointed out that open space or green space, park space, however you want to refer to it, in that southern portion specifically the southwestern portion of the township, is something that's very desirable. Where that property exists, I'm not sure that's been identified yet, but it's certainly on a lot of folks' radar. So looks like we have someone with a hand raised, Mr. Viviano. I don't know if we can get him unmuted.
Mr. Viviano, go ahead and unmute and you should be able to speak.
Yeah, hi, Josh.
Hey, Frank.
I actually want to follow that discussion that Mr. Scurto, the point he made about holding on to the high density that is currently the town center. Of all the demographics listed, who is the most likely resident of that community, of that portion of the township, if it were to be developed as currently planned?
I didn't catch the middle part. Could you repeat that, Mr. Viviano?
My question was, if we were to follow through with the plan as is regarding the town center, who is the most likely targeted demographic resident?
The most likely target demographic would probably be, I could see some of the older groups, more the active seniors, 55 and older. I could see them coming in, trying to jettison some of the maintenance needed on their current houses. We do have a sizable number nowadays that love to travel and love to have less responsibilities and upkeep of property. We probably also see a sizable number of younger couples that don't quite have the children yet that are looking for tight homes, more of an urban environment. I find the same cohorts, the active seniors as well as those in the 20s are having the same interest all the way around. So I see those two ends. There are more of a sizable number I'm seeing in some of the inner ring urban cores of the suburban, the first tier core around like city Detroit or other large cities, being developed in smaller homes and getting quite a few young families to enjoy central parks that they go to.
I would assume that both of those cohort groups, they would be living in an area like that partially because of the low maintenance and relatively low cost of the housing, but also to the readily accessible shops, restaurants, coffee houses, correct?
Correct. And also I believe
so how do you get them there when there's already nothing there? Meaning that portion of the township is our least accessible. We're down 2 bridges to the east.
Yeah.
And it's also the least developed.
Yes.
Meaning until someone is brave enough to invest a lot of money to open up businesses there, it will be hard to get people to want to move in that area for that specific reason. So how long do we need to sit on that type of a master plan, at least that portion of the master plan, as the area builds up around it large enough to make that feasible?
The master plan is supposed to be updated every 5 years. I would give it another 5 years to look at. And one of the things we're looking at from a marketing standpoint in that area is we saw through Will's presentation, the sizable number of folks like trails and things. If we can get the trail system started, then not only do they have access to more of a denser environment, but they got ready access to a trail system that reaches out to the region. And so not everybody's going to want that type of development, but there are a number of folks that will want to come in and pay for that. But we have to find the right developers to come in, understand about the trails, and have the marketing ability to do that. The businesses will follow once you get a density in there. That's why we're also looking at peripheral development of office or smaller scale commercial on the periphery of that, area too.
Yeah, and I would, this is Josh, I would add to that too, that I think if the that kind of Main Street downtown, core part of the township is something that's still desirable. I think connectivity is maybe the very first thing, Broughton Road being connected through, if a restaurant or a shop is difficult to get to, nobody really is going to want to open one up there. So I think that's one of, if not the first thing that would need to happen. But, adding the kind of mixed use brings both really the retail and I think the density at the same time. So working in advance to touch base with some of those folks who might be interested, working with some of the developers that own that property, but also going through the master plan process. This is our opportunity to help shape the development as a whole. If we want to restrict, commercial or office development in slightly further out areas and really only allow them to develop in the downtown, that's another way, to make that happen. We control how we zone our property. So if we say we only want those commercial and office type developments and retail developments, mixed use developments in that certain area, we can control that. This is, again, if that's something the township really wants, if that's what the resident and the leadership wants for the township, this is our opportunity to control that as we.
Right. And I appreciate that. Josh, I expressed this to you before. I definitely see the attractiveness of the high density areas for certain demographics. At the way we currently sit in the township, with the way our housing has developed and their usage has developed, where it is planted right now still seems like a bit of a square peg round hole situation. I'm just trying to wrap my head around how the community would shape around that plan. And to some degree, you've answered it a little bit. I believe the town center was first put into the master plan, correct me if I'm wrong, about 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know the exact date, but I know the current master plan is 2008. I've seen the master plan from 2002, which was the one preceding it, and it was in that one as well.
Okay.
I've seen it prior to that. So yeah.
My understanding is the idea of the town center was conceived or was patterned after the success of similar communities on a larger scale in states like Florida, where they were getting a huge influx of population from all across the country. And they could relatively quickly design a community from the ground up, create what they wanted and just fill it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, at least at the time that we did it, if that was a fair comparison to compare, Southeast Michigan to Florida, and that way our population, certainly we've seen in Southeast Michigan an exodus of population, which is something we'd like to reverse. But I'm not sure that when they first put it in there, they fully thought through the full implication of holding that land aside. That's my comment.
Yep. Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? Raise your hand. We do have a few more comments here in the chat room. Linda Floor says good ideas about internet. Is that something the township can assist with the residents and having, and then also if the younger people want larger lots with smaller homes, won't they also want an area with less clay and soil with which to provide good gardens? And that I guess that's a good question, Will. I don't know if that's something you can touch on. Do these these younger folks that want the larger yard, do they want that yard for more recreation uses, or do you see them growing gardens and small patches of agriculture, things like that?
I see it as a mixed bag. Certainly, a lot of young folks that I know are interested in gardening. They're even interested in beekeeping and some of those other kinds of things. So, from a soil amendment standpoint, you know, it's an opportunity for one of those agricultural areas for someone to have compost and sell manure and those kind of things. So, it's something that can be accommodated. The thing that you'll just want to think through is, are there any gardening kind of things that you want to be cautious of within those areas? So like front yard gardens, that's something that's come up. Backyard chickens, backyard bees, backyard sheep. I mean, people can push the envelope pretty well on which kind of farm animals to bring into a residential area. So you'll just need to think through some of those kinds of issues and how to handle them as they come up.
Sure, sure. Thanks. Any other questions or comments? Anybody else want to raise their hand and speak, or provide a comment in the chat room? Well, seeing none, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Please keep paying attention to cultivatemacomb.com. We will keep you updated with everything that's happening on the project. Provide some more opportunities to give your feedback. We'll provide, the results for the survey, things like that, all on the website. Please also continue to share with friends, neighbors, family members. Get folks to take that survey, to participate in the photo contest. We do have some nice gift cards to local restaurants and local shops. That, I guess we will conclude this evening's master plan. So thanks everyone for participating, and look forward to hearing from you again as we continue on this process. Thanks everyone.